Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your lead analyst and host, Elliot Clough, at Elliot Clough on Twitter. Before we get started, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, whether you're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, etc., so you don't miss an episode going forward. Drop a like, drop a comment. And as you know, we alluded to this earlier last week. Gonna have a special guest here on HawkCast on this. We'll be releasing it on Monday. We're recording here on Friday afternoon because we wanted to make it work for Brad, who is a very busy guy. Brad Heinrichs joining us, the CEO of Swarm. So kind to hop on with us. So Brad, first of all, we appreciate it. Second of all, glad we can make it work. We've talked about
Hey,
this here and there, and glad we could finally make it happen.
same here. Same here. I'm glad to be on and what better to do on, I guess for us it's a Friday afternoon than to talk Hawks.
Oh yeah.
Let's get it going.
For sure, for sure. Well, Brett, I'm honestly really curious as to what December and January was like for you. If you're not watching on YouTube, Brad, I could feel the stress through the Zoom
Yeah,
call here.
yeah, it's interesting. It's the transfer portal is quite a there's so many different words that you can use to describe it. I mean, I've heard people call it speed dating. I feel like the next agent that tells the truth might be the first one. Um, you know, it's a lot of marketing. There's a lot of kids in the transfer portal that, frankly, their head coaches are saying, "Oh my gosh, thank God that person left." Because they were a real problem. Um, and there's also some good players. There's some also good, good kids out there. And the hard part is you got to be able to cull the bad ones out, pick out the good ones, and then in a really, really quick fashion, um, figure out whether they're going to fit for your program. And if so, you got to act fast. And um and then what's really interesting this year that's different than prior years. This year was interesting. Well, prior years I was pretty much, from the monetary standpoint, that was my entire bag. I was that guy, right? This year, it's interesting because and Tyler Barnes and I work very closely together, and have the entire time. But this year, the kids, if you think about January through December, if the revenue sharing goes through, say call it July 1, there's a train, the starting July 1, the student athletes can be paid directly by athletics. And so when we're negotiating deals, we have to, number one, figure out, how much money we have collectively between the athletic department for football and Swarm. And then you got to figure out, okay, what are we going to pay this person? And and then and then there's the discussion of, well, how much, Brad, are you going to pay him through the Swarm? And then how much is athletics going to pay them after July 1? And so it's like I said, it's a little bit more of a complex equation this year than it was last year when it was just 100% Swarm, and I had my arms around everything to kind of say, okay, this is what we can afford. This is who, kind of this is a person that we can get, that the football coaches want. And then you do the negotiation. They visit the campus, they figure out whether they want to be here. I work with the agent to figure out whether we can make it work financially, and then it's done. This year it's a little bit more different because you have two different people that are negotiating with the agent. You have our GM Barnes, and then me. I'm on the Swarm side. He's on the athletic side, and anyway, just it. getting back to your original question, I've just been just kind of a motor mouth over here. Um, it's been a whirlwind, right? You would have guessed that. And it's interesting because the you see the fans will latch on to somebody and develop an opinion, oh, this person will be great. And then we would find out, or I would find out, know that this person is not anybody we want any part of because we have some information on this kid that's like, this is not a good kid for our program. That's happened multiple times. Um, or it'll be somebody, there's a kid that we really, really want that nobody's talking about. And when I say we, I'm talking the football coaches. I'm not a talent evaluator.
Yeah.
Um, I'm the guy who thought Ryan Leaf would have a better NFL career than Peyton Manning. I'm the guy as a Chiefs fan that wanted us to take Deshaun Watson and was pissed off when we traded up for Patrick Mahomes.
Brad, I don't
Okay.
know if you know this. I'm a Chargers fan.
Oh,
You are,
okay.
I mean, I wasn't alive. I don't think I was alive. What draft was that? That
Well, it was
night?
when Manning came out. So when
Right.
was Peyton Manning drafted? That would have been late 90s, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
was not sentient yet. I was born in
y-
'96, so but still
uh,
lots of pain in the organization. So I'm right
yeah.
there with you.
So I get my point to you is that fortunately for all Iowa fans out there, I'm not the one deciding whether or not we like that one or that one. That's not my choice because I would obviously pick the wrong guy, like I said. But I'm the one that tries to raise money and help be able to finance some of these guys through the swarm. So um, again, really interesting times, and I think we got some good players, and quite frankly, I don't think we're done yet. I think in the spring, we're going to try to get you know two, three more. We'll see how it goes, but. We're real excited about the quarterback room at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Lot to unpack there. You mentioned quarterback. Let's go to that first, because that's the
Sure.
story out of the offseason, right? Getting Mark
It
Gronowski
has to be.
from,
Has
yeah,
to be.
from South Dakota State. And while we're talking about a little bit of my fandom or previous experiences, I went to UNI, covered UNI, so I got to see Mark Gronowski light up the Panthers several years in a row. So I'm definitely excited about what he could bring to Iowa on top of, seeing him the last few years. Just a stud, right? I guess how
He
did it,
is.
yeah, how did it all come together from your vantage point? Him ending up in Iowa City.
Well, I don't. I'm not sure exactly all that I'm allowed to talk about.
As much as you can share.
Um,
Sure.
yeah, how should I say? Well, so here's what happens, okay? And I'm not talking about Gronowski necessarily specifically, but you will hear from, and this is crappy, but this is more of a generic thing. But you will hear from these guys all have agents now. Okay. It's not just the superstar players. It used to be, oh, Caitlin Clark has an agent. Well, that makes sense,
Right.
right? But these other guys, they don't have an agent, right? Now, everybody has an agent, right? It's like I don't think there's a player that doesn't have an agent of some sort, right? And so what happens is these agents, they try to make money, and these agents absolutely crush these kids. Again, none of this is about Gronowski, by the way. This is not. This is just generic. I'm just talking about the state of NIL and college athletics. These agents prey on these kids. They're charging them 10 to 20% of whatever they get. Absolutely pisses me off. Because these kids a lot of them are going to get what they're going to get, and the agent has no business. The agent didn't get him that. You know what I mean? Now, if the agent goes and gets him a shoe deal on the side, hey, go ahead and take your cut.
Right.
But in general, they're going to get what they're going to get, and the agent had nothing to do about it, nothing to say about it, really. And so, anyway, what these agents will do, the kid may not even be looking to leave, and an agent will start dropping his name to other to other programs saying, "Hey, would you be interested in Schnitzel Fritz over here?" And they say, "Oh yeah, oh for sure," And we go, "Well, what kind of NIL deal would you put together for Schnitzel Fritz if he was to enter the portal?" So you get all these hypothetical, nonsensical to some level questions, and people, and then so what's interesting about this whole portal thing is you got the guys in the portal, and then you're hearing from agents of guys who aren't in the portal about like they are in the portal, right? And so you're kind of like, why are we dealing in hypotheticals here? The problem is that you almost have to because the minute they hit the portal, then it's like you rev it up to 100 miles an hour to figure out whether this guy is going to be a good fit to you or not. Because you obviously can't call a kid that's on another team that's in a portal, even though that happens to our players all the damn time. It's it's just nauseating. I mean, I had a parent of an Iowa kid call me and say, "Hey, you know, we're we are committed Hawkeyes from the get-go, but this SEC school, to remain nameless, is offering X amount of dollars. And to us, that is insane kind of money. And we're not trying to leverage you. We're not trying to, they're just the nicest people. We're not trying to do anything to um, to be disrespectful because we appreciate everything that you've given him. We appreciate everything that he gets. However, this amount of money is something that we can't just ignore. And so then it becomes a scramble to see what we can do to appease, to figure out whether, well, number one, whether we want to change what we're paying him or not. And then number two, okay, how are we going to pay for this? You know, um, but that's the kind of stuff that's happening. I mean, I feel like these SEC schools must have like a telethon group that's just out there pounding the phones and calling kids on other teams' rosters and say, go after this one, this one, this one, this one for Iowa. Go after this one, this one, this one, this one, this one for whatever other school. And these kids are just getting constantly hit up during the year. Anyway, that's all aside. Um, Whether we're talking about Mark or whether we're talking about Hank, Mark, for example, coming from a FCS school, but basically being one of the best, if not the best player in the FCS. He came into the portal later than a lot of other kids. Um, we actually there was talk again. You never know how any when I said earlier about agents not being truthful. There were agents or other agents or people were saying, like our president likes to say, people are saying, you
Yeah.
know, people were saying that he was going to enter the portal last year. Didn't happen. All right. And so we heard the same sorts of rumblings this year. Wasn't in the portal. There was no secret that we tried to, we went after the Penn State backup quarterback, Prabula. I'm not
Yep.
sure if I'm even pronouncing his last name right. But he entered the portal, and that was somebody that Coach Lester really liked, and we certainly pursued him, and he ended up choosing Missouri, which hope that works out for him. Because I think we ended up getting our guy in the end. Sometimes, as the old song goes, sometimes God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. We may ended up we ended up with Mark, and obviously if we would have gotten Alex, then we wouldn't have probably been in the Mark sweepstakes, if you will.
Sure.
And so he entered late, and we actually felt like that was to our benefit because a lot of the other programs that were looking for quarterbacks had already gotten their quarterbacks, right?
Sure.
So we're not competing against Missouri for him at this point, or we're not competing against some of these other teams that have signed, big signed, highly sought after quarterbacks. Um, And so I wonder, kind of aloud whether or not we would have gotten him if he would have entered at the beginning versus when he did. Um, but I will tell you this: I think he was interested in Iowa from the get-go. He was planning on going into the NFL. And I'm not, you'd have to ask him, but my speculation, again, you have to ask him, is that, if we weren't openly looking for a quarterback, would he have just gone to the NFL? I think this kid played at Kinnick, loved the atmosphere, and is just he's chewing nails to get back to get back into that atmosphere and play. And so this kid's gritty, he's tough. I don't have to tell you, you watched him play a lot. Um, and he's a hell of a leader. And so we are super, super excited to have this kid. And we're super excited to have Hank too. I mean, I think his dad may have gone to school with Lester or something.
And
There's a certainly a
both of his parents did. Yep, high school.
yeah, so there's a connection there, and kind of interesting. We have two quarterbacks from the Chicago suburbs now that probably grew up within 20 minutes of each other.
Yeah.
Kind of wild there. But one thing I'll say about Hank is that he signed with us, shows up literally like a couple of days later. He was one of the easiest NIL guys I've ever had to deal with. He just hey, this, looks reasonable. Let's go. Um, and he practiced really well, and the coaches were like, kind of nodding their heads like, "Yep, that's what we want." That was a good call because again, it's speed dating, really, right? And so I know the coaches are very excited about him too, and unlike what people might think, there's some people that think that we promised somebody a starting job or whatever. I can tell you that Iowa football, one thing I've learned is that in Iowa football, there's no promises other than the opportunity to compete. We promise you that opportunity to compete, and whether you become the starter or not, is going to be a result of how well you do in those competitions. But so there's not a okay, we promise you this. And there are kids, by the way, that are in the portal that want promises that are bigger promises than the ones we're willing to make. Those aren't the kids that we go after. Those are the kids that we let go somewhere else. That you know, it's just Kirk's culture. That's just not who he is. He's not going to promise so and so a starting spot to come here. If you're good enough, you're not needing a promise, right? If you get you are the promise to be able to compete is all you want if you're good enough, right? If you know that if you're one of the best players out there, you're not worried about whether you're going to win a starting spot as long as you're given that opportunity. You're willing to bet on yourself, right?
Right.
And so anyway, um, we're fired up about both guys, and we think that I think Tim would tell you, well, Kirk would tell you that our quarterback room as a whole is probably the best it's been for a really long time.
I don't think that's all that difficult to even figure out as a media member, as somebody who's a fan on the outside, right? I mean, Sully was really fun this year and
Yeah,
what he was able to do, and you look at the film from Hank and Mark. But one thing that I think a lot of people were curious about during the acquisition of Mark, the addition of Mark through the portal, is if the
yeah.
folks in Iowa City knew that injury was something that could have been an issue, could have been something he like they knew he was probably going to miss the spring when he signed with Iowa.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I frankly I don't I'm not privy to every conversation.
Sure.
So I'm not what's interesting is that they don't do, and again, this is the speed dating stuff. It's in talking to Kirk, he was really interesting. I talked to him a week or so ago about this. That he made the remark, and I said something like, you know, the NFL. seems to kind of have a lot of these things figured out, free agency and contracts and and he's like, of course they do. They've been doing it for for decades. They of course have this all figured out. And when you're a free agent, you go visit. They give you a physical. They do all of these. You have to remember how there's a process for every single one of them. Well, in college, there's no process. I mean, it's just the process is it's just like chaos. That's the process.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine that as we evolve, as NCAA athletics evolves, the process will be refined and improved. Um, so when a portal kid comes in on the campus, you can't say, okay, before you come to the football facility, we want you to go next door to Iowa Hospital, and we want to give you the CEO physical, right, or
Sure.
whatever. We're not. There's none of that, right? You're not.
Okay.
You don't send them to the weight room and let's see what you can do in here. There's none of that stuff. We'll show you the weight room,
Yeah.
but you're not gonna see how many times you can bench press something, right? Um, I do believe that I know that what I was want to say. I know that we knew what we were getting ourselves into. It was not as if that we signed the documents and he announces that he's come to Iowa, and then 4 days later he says, "Oh, hey, coach, by the way." That's not how it happened. That wasn't how it happened. So, I will tell you that I myself learned about it later in the game. I knew about it before he signed. I mean, don't get me wrong. It was just later in the courtship
Sure.
of Mark.
Sure.
Well, I learned about it later, but quite frankly, that's not my lane, right? I'm about finances, right? I'm not
Sure.
about evaluating whether this is somebody we want or don't want. And in talking to Kirk about it, as once he let me know about this, you know, the we've had lots of players before that. I mean, Nick Jackson showed up June 1, you know, just showed up to campus June 1. He didn't practice in the spring. I think Y.A. Black probably practiced maybe one or two springs ever at Iowa. He kind of knew what he was doing when he was out there. It's not as if Mark's not going to be in the building all spring. He's going to be involved, and um, and he's going to heal. He's going to be fully healthy. I don't think that what he had going on was something that was a huge deal to our medical staff or our coaches. They would not have. It was too big a bet to if they were worried that this was an iffy situation. He didn't have Tommy John surgery, okay? It's not like, where you're wondering whether the guy's going to be able to throw something ever again, right? There's not this is not what we're talking about here. And so, they felt really good about the chances of him being, even better than before, in very short order and by all accounts, that's what's going to happen. So I don't think the Iowa fans need to have anything to really worry about. I think he's going to be, once we get to summer, maybe even late spring, maybe in the spring, he's going to be full go.
So there were a couple things about that. Is one, my thinking when folks were freaking out about him missing the spring is you really
Oh yeah.
Iowa is gonna go out and get this guy and spend a bunch of money and not know. One, two, it was reported that he had the injury after the playoff game against North Dakota State. So obviously Iowa was going to
He,
know about that.
he could have played. He could have. I mean,
Exactly.
this is something that he could have just said, forget it. Let's just keep going and play with it. I don't think that this is one of those deals where, he was broken down and he's dragging an arm along the ground or anything,
Right.
where they're having to reattach something. This wasn't this this was, these weren't broken bones or anything where you're wondering whether he's gonna ever be the same.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I the hard part is that just because the media and the fans find out about something later doesn't mean that the staff didn't know much earlier. It's just that they chose not to tell you
Yeah.
until
Yeah.
later.
Yeah. Right.
You know,
Right.
I mean, yeah, I've learned that a lot is when they know something and when they tell you about it, sometimes they're very distant. And that even includes me. There's certain things that I don't find out until much later. Other things I find out right away, and I just wait for it to, wait to finally, um, for the rest of the world to come to know about it. So,
Sure.
it's very, very interesting being in my role, my current role anyway, from an information standpoint.
Sure. Now, the other point I was going to make about Mark too is, and this is based off, interviews that I've heard of his, the fact that SDSU is a program that's similar to Iowa in terms of development, the type of guys they bring in. Um, it would have surprised me just based on who Mark is that he would have kept that secret. One, two, he just in my experience, I've never had a bad experience with an Iowa athlete, right? Like in our interviews,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's especially with the football program.
They're
Um,
very respectful kids. Very respectful kids.
Mark seems like a Hawkeye to me.
He does. He absolutely does. He craves the culture. Been an admirer of Iowa football for a really long time. This isn't one of those things where he just woke up suddenly and says, guess I'll go play for Iowa, whatever the hell that, this was something where he's like, oh, I think that if we had our quarterback, I think he would be going into the NFL draft. That's what I think. I think it really came down in his mind. I am, this is my opinion. Okay. It could be wrong. But in my opinion, I think he was deciding between us and the NFL. And it took somebody like us, or maybe just us, for him to play college football again. He is a South Dakota State guy through and through. And the thought of him going from where he was playing to play somewhere else in college was a hurdle he had to mentally get over, and it wasn't an easy one. And I also think he's a competitor. And I may be wrong on this because one of the things I thought about was, we didn't offer him a scholarship out of high school. We kind of
Right.
passed on him, right? Offered him a walk-on spot, but not a scholarship. I think a lot of competitors are like, wait a minute, you had your chance at me before and you said no, now I'm gonna, I think those were all mental things he had to kind of get over. And for him, um, you know, he's a professional kid. He's gonna play in the league. I mean, that's one of the cool things that I think we can say is that, we suddenly have a quarterback, at least one quarterback, maybe more than one, that we're gonna be playing in the NFL. This kid's an NFL player. Hank Brown may be an NFL player too. He's got the size and the arm. So, I think we may have acquired two NFL type quarterbacks in this offseason, which, I don't think is any, it's no surprise to anybody that we could use a couple of those considering we've struggled at that position for a little while. And so that's been the most refreshing and exciting part of our off season. I'd also tell you that at defensive tackle, I think we've improved ourselves quite a bit as well. And we needed to. We needed players at defensive tackle. And I think that Coach Bell has got some more weapons in his room now, and that was another big need. I think the next one is we need to bolster our secondary, whether it's depth or otherwise, and I think that's going to be the focus in the spring.
Sure. So you mentioned D tackle. That's Jonah Pace and Bryce Hawthorne.
Yep.
I think a lot of people really like those additions. Hawthorne got 3 years of eligibility left.
Oh, how good is that?
Right, another South
Fantastic.
Dakota State kid. And then
Yep.
you got Sam Phillips, who came in late, had some other options. So that's a speedster right there.
He is a burner. And he's the kind of guy that we haven't really had for a little bit. I think both he and I think that we're going to I would expect us to use Weechin a little bit more in our offense next year. People kind of forget about him as being an offensive player. They think of him as just a specialist. But I think I would bet you that he becomes a bigger part of our offense next year than he was this year because he's a game changer when he has the ball in his hands. I mean, he's got the ability to score at any time he touches the ball. And so I think with him becoming a bigger part of the offense, plus Phillips, our wide receiver room has gotten better in the offseason as well.
So to transition from talking more so about the on-field product, there are a lot of, I think, misperceptions or preconceived notions about how NIL goes, how things are going on behind the scenes. And obviously, like if there's anybody that's in the thick of it, it's you who has
Yeah,
to.
what do you want to know? I'll tell you
I, I guess
what is it that you want to know?
what I'm most curious about is what are maybe the main misconceptions or things that you look at that are just like a general narrative that's like that is not true. I just maybe for something to clear the air, I suppose. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, the things that drive me crazy. One of them specifically is that I keep hearing, and the number seems to go up every few months. The amount of money that we paid Cade McNamara was like, it was 600, then 800, then 1.2, and whatever the heck it was. People were acting like we paid him millions of dollars at Iowa. And while I can't tell you how much we paid him. That's the second thing. Well, the first one was specifically him. The second misconception that drives me crazy is that I refuse to be transparent and that I'm hiding something. The problems are with this is that when you sign a kid to a contract, there's a confidentiality provision in there that says I'm not going to tell anybody how much we're paying you. There's also a confidentiality provision that says you, student athlete, aren't going to tell anybody else what we're paying you. All right? Do they always abide by that? No. But you'd like to, but I will tell you that as an adult, you know, I'm gonna carry my end of that bargain. And so I can't say how much I'm paying so and so player. I just can't. Um, and so I'm often accused of not being transparent. I'm happy to give anybody my financials. I'm happy to tell you about how much money we've raised and what our expenses are and all of these sorts of things. Or I'm even happy to tell you how much we're spending on all of our athletes, you know. Um, but I can't tell you how much I'm paying that athlete or that athlete. That's not something I can do because I would be violating a contract. Um, so that's a misconception. Um, the other misconceptions out there. I mean, it's not really not a misconception. It's just that so many people think that these athletes don't deserve to be paid anything, and it kind of blows me away. I think the people that often um, complain, I can't believe these guys are being paid to play college sports. Isn't a scholarship good enough? And I'm thinking, well, you know what? If you went and worked for a company and you brought the company millions of dollars of revenue, my hunch is that you would want to be paid, and you're from the state of Iowa. What is in-state tuition in Iowa now? 15 grand? I have no idea.
I don't know either.
Let's just say it's 15 grand. My hunch is that if you bring the your employer millions of dollars or even hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, you'd like to be paid more than 15 grand for doing it. Especially when you are spending hours and you're spending a good part of every single day physically working to bring in those monies. And all that the new rules are doing are basically saying, okay, we're going to recognize, assuming that this all goes through, we're going to recognize that, yeah, you're bringing us a whole lot of money and we're going to pay you for it. Okay. I mean, isn't that what you would want if you were working somewhere else? And just because they might be 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, who cares? They have a right to make money just like I do with being 50. And so I think people like to look at it the wrong way. Um, and that sort of drives me crazy. But as far as misconceptions, I'm trying to think what else that people think about NIL that's just not true. I'm not sure what narratives are out. I don't know all the narratives that are out there.
Sure.
But maybe you have a couple.
Well, I guess my main thing, from my vantage point, based on, what I've read, what I've heard from you, what I've otherwise been privy to, is you and Swarm are as transparent as you possibly can be.
It's not my money. I have nothing to hide. I contribute to it personally, lots of money. I spend tons of time. I'm happy to, if someone says I want your finance, I want to know how much you're spending on this or that, I'll tell you as long as it's not getting to a specific on a player. I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I only have one paid employee. I'm not trying to make this some kind of, I guess that's another misconception. But there are a lot of people that think that I am somehow benefiting financially from this. I can tell you that this is the biggest money drain I have ever been a part of from my perspective. I am spending, well, I'm spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on this. Okay. So this is when people say, oh, and by the way, I'm taking no salary, zero. I don't reimburse my expenses, none of that stuff. And I donate just like other people do.
Mhm.
And so, I try not to get offended, but sometimes it really irks me or annoys me that people think that I am somehow gaining financially from this endeavor. The only thing that what I gain from this are the relationships that I develop with coaches, players, and staff people in football, basketball, and other sports. That's been awesome. Okay. So don't think I'm getting nothing from this. But nothing financial. It's been the relationships. And then I would also say the satisfaction of watching maybe somebody that I helped get here succeed as a Hawkeye. Now that's pretty cool, right? Oh, hey, I had a hand in bringing this person here, and he's awesome, and he's doing great, or I just had a hand in keeping this guy from leaving, and he's a first team All-American. I can say that. I can say that to my family. Yeah, if it wasn't for the swarm, that dude would have been gone, and he ended up being a first team All-American by staying. And those are the kinds of victories. That's the satisfaction and the wins that I get from this. There's nothing financial at all.
I think that's really important for people to know too. Just out of the goodness of your heart, one of those things.
Well, it's not that I'm not saying goodness of I want the Hawks to freaking win. I
Yeah.
want them to win every single game, and I don't want them to just win. I want them to blow everybody out. Okay, I want to crush Iowa State. I want to rub it in their face. All right, and and so you know so I don't know if my heart's that good from that stand. I mean, I really want to take it to them,
Yeah.
okay? And so I'm not soft here, but it's really just about I want the Hawks to win, and it seemed to me that we didn't have anybody else that wanted to take this on and we were starting to fall behind,
Mhm.
and so I said. I can maybe help at least get this started let somebody else who's way better at this do it. And up until this point, nobody's come to me and said, I can do a better job than you, Brad. Can I have the keys? If someone does that and they can convince me, which I'm happy to be convinced that they can do a better job. I'm happy. Let them have it. It's not, I mean, it would save me a whole lot of time and money. Um, but having said that, it's been a lot of fun. I didn't want to make anybody, I don't want to give off the impression that I haven't benefited at all from this. It's just not been a financial, but it's not been my one of my financial a good financial decision, that's for sure.
That's, I think, what I was thinking there. So it's important to emphasize is this is not necessarily commonplace where the folks who are running these collectives aren't taking
No,
money.
no,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that it's pretty widespread that people are making money off of this.
For sure, for sure. The things that um, I'm proud, I'm happy that I'm in a financial position because I run another company that I do take money from. That I'm able to do this. I mean,
Yeah.
and this is not my full-time job, being the CEO of Swarm. It's not. It feels like it. And sometimes I'm working more than full-time hours on this, but um, yeah, most other I'm almost all, if not all, other collective heads do take money. I've found it to be somewhat liberating that I don't for lots of reasons because then I don't have anybody saying you're not worth what you're paying yourself. I
Mhm.
hate that concept. I'm worth every penny that I'm paying myself. You know, I can say that to anybody. Nobody can say I'm overpaid. That actually makes me feel better, right? Um, and I'm kind of sensitive to that concept. So, um, but yeah, there's one of the things I was going to tell you. I was going to tell you one of the things I'm really proud of is that there's a high percentage of collectives out there that offer deals to kids. They accept the deal, they show up, and then the collective doesn't pay. And I've
Way
got
more
there's
common
kids
than
on.
way more common than people think.
Yes, there are kids on the team that when I talk to them, they'll say something to me like, "Oh, I was talking to my bro over at wherever, and he went there thinking he was going to make X, and he made less than 25% of X." And the hard part is it's not like when you and I have a job and we go to work for somebody and they say, "Hey, Brad, we're going to pay you $50,000 a year." You show up and your first paycheck is on it's on a scale for $25,000 a year, and you're like, "Wait a minute here, I quit if this is the deal, right?" You quit, then you can't play anywhere else that season. So
Mhm.
you're kind of stuck there. And from that perspective, that's the piece of the whole deal that really stinks is that the kid, if he gets sold a bill of goods and gets ripped off, he doesn't have a lot of recourse unless it's legal. The problem is that a lot of these collectives don't sign real contracts. And or the contract will say the amount that we're paying you can be adjusted at the discretion of the collective at any time. There'll be that little line in there,
That's
and
crazy.
and then they're like, well, you know what? You dropped a 25-yard pass over the middle that I think you should have caught this week. You ain't getting paid this month. That kind of stuff is happening, and that's unfortunate. I can tell you, like I said, one of the things I'm really proud of is that we've honored 100% of our contracts, paid them whether the kid is doing well or whether he was a complete bust. We're paying as long as he does what he's required to do in the contract. As long as he's delivering the Meals on Wheels or doing some of the things that we ask him to do, he or she is gonna get compensated in accordance with what we have in our agreement.
Now, you mentioned those things with contracts with other schools. We don't have to get too much into that. But as far as the revenue sharing model, does that maybe help avoid that type of situation in the future? One. And two, you mentioned assuming it passes in July, you're going to have the school, you're going to have Swarm. So Swarm will still exist. This won't be getting rid of collectives or anything like that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't think that the collectives will go away.
Okay.
The general consensus in the Big Ten is that the collectives will remain. What now? What happens on April 7th, I think it is, when they rule on the settlement, whether they either bless it, change it, or reject it, that could obviously change, what comes to be. Um, so I envision the swarm continuing on. Now, could it be that the Swarm Inc. side, more the corporate side, becomes a bigger player, an even bigger player than it is now? I could see that. Um, where we're working on just the majority of our time isn't necessarily getting money from fans, but rather getting businesses to have student athletes advertise for them or do things for them, and then they get paid that way, in addition to what they're getting from the athletic department. Do I think that the athletic departments are going to be more apt to hold up their end of the bargain on players? I do. I think that's one of the things that's kind of, I think there's some collectives out there that are a bit shady, and they're not on the up and up. Um, so the other thing that's interesting is that the contracts that I'm seeing through revenue sharing, a lot of them have incentives in them, which my collective contracts don't. You can put in a revenue share contract that if we win this many games, you get this amount of bonus, or if you throw for this many yards, or you do this, just like in the NFL. I mean, remember, there's always NFL guys. I mean, I remember who was it, Mike Evans, the other week that he
Yep.
had they putting him in. They're putting him in like in a game that's already over, and they should be kneeling out the clock, and they're trying to get him 6 yards or 7 yards so that he can, get over 1,000 yards receiving and get a big bonus or something like that. And then everybody went nuts when they did it, and you had to know what was going on in order to realize what the heck was happening. But they can do that now with the revenue sharing monies, as opposed to with the collectives. They told us that we couldn't pay, we couldn't provide these incentives or have performance based payments. So you couldn't say, hey, if you average this many points, then you get this amount, or if you run for this many yards, you get that bonus. We couldn't do that with swarm money, but apparently with revenue sharing, from what I can tell, those you can structure player contracts in college just like they do in the NFL, which have a lot of incentives in them.
Hmm. Okay. The Now to maybe go back onto the playing field, or I guess the court now.
Yep.
I think one of the other misconceptions, and maybe it's not a misconception, maybe this is where the transparency comes in. A lot of folks around the basketball program, men's basketball in particular, say, "Oh, we
Yep.
didn't get that guy because of money." I guess how
Ah,
I
I
mean,
get that a lot.
yeah, I figured you did.
Yeah, that's a misconception. A lot of times it's not that we didn't get him. Sometimes there is a financial component. It could be that we didn't get this guy because we didn't want we didn't think that he was worth the money he was asking.
Okay.
You know, and you got to look at the rest of your roster, right? While these kids aren't supposed to talk about how much they make, let's just these are 20-year-old kids. A lot of times they do. And you don't want to have one kid on your roster that you're paying some obscene amount, um, that ends up getting beat out by a guy that's making some fraction of that amount. And then the guy who's making the fraction of the amount is kind of saying, well, where's my bag, so to speak? Now, does that happen in the NFL and other places? Yes. Will it probably end up happening in college? Yes, it probably will. But I think that Tyler and Kirk and the staff have done a pretty good job of really trying to figure out, with our with our resources, what should we be paying a kid who's a potential All-American at this position versus a kid who's a potential All Big Ten versus okay, this is a fit, just a starter, just a good starter, but not going to win accolades, or versus this is a reserve player. This is and they've got buckets for pay scales for that, and they have to figure out who on their roster deserves what. And when they're looking in the portal, they have to look at, all right, where will that person fall in that pantheon of a pay scale, and do we want to pay for that? Do we think he's a good fit culturally, football, blah blah blah. It's going to be very interesting to see as we move forward how football, just talk about football, how football programs value certain positions. Like I'll give you an example. Take cornerback. Uh, you get a program that puts cornerbacks out on an island to play man coverage.
Mhm.
Okay, that's now a position that we got to make sure we got good players, right? Because otherwise we're getting torched for 75-yard touchdowns all the time, right? But other teams, defenses that might play a lot more zone may not feel like they need to overpay for that position, and they would rather spend their money somewhere else. So again, that part is going to get really interesting, I think. So that's just more than you wanted to hear, but
No, you're good. Um, and we're getting into some questions from some of our premium subscribers here, and generally, I think and we got one from Doug E89. He was curious about Joshua Lewis and that recent commitment, if you were involved
yeah.
there at all.
Josh Lewis. So um, so he played. He's a Tampa kid. The question probably has to do with um, because he's from Florida. It may be because he's from Florida and I'm from Florida, and my son played AU basketball at the same program that Josh. So
Wow, I
yeah,
didn't know
so
that.
there's some connection there, but I wasn't involved with
Okay,
that. Other than to say that I, you know, checked up with the AU coaches and what do you think? Kind of give me the Cliff Notes version of the scouting report here on this kid,
sure.
to see how good he is, and he's a heck of a player. But I think he's going to be one of those. I don't think he's one and done. By the way, I don't think he's
Okay.
going to be show up, be here a year, and NBA kind of thing. I don't think he's that kind of a player. But he's going to be I think he's got a chance to be a real solid piece of our future as a wing.
Everything I've heard is that as well.
He's
And
a really great kid
that
too. He
too.
comes from a good family. Yeah.
Been on the phone with him once, and it was great. But so first Josh Lewis, and then just generally speaking, this question from Doug E89, Ad Hoc is in here, Waterloo Chaz is in here, basically asking where Iowa stacks up in the Big Ten, both in football, basketball, and women's basketball. And the other part of the women's basketball question is, we know Caitlin Clark didn't take any money from Swarm, right?
Right.
On the other hand, have you seen like a donations or like an involvement on the women's basketball side spike, or has it been, what you expected? Or I guess what's your vantage point there for women's basketball? And then just in terms of how each of these
Okay.
programs stack up in the Big Ten.
So when women, well, and again, this is one of those things where um, you don't always know where you stack up. Um, and I'll give you an example too. Like for example, you could look at Iowa State's basketball or Iowa State's NIL program, and you kind of go, well, I think we may have more money than Iowa State's NIL program. However, they also have a guy that finances their basketball players, not through their collective. So again, it's whatever my answer is to your questions is going to be somewhat. There's a caveat there. It's somewhat speculative, and there's not where we have to report. And remember, we got two sides of this, right? So we've got the Swarm Inc. and the Swarm Collective. Anybody that's evaluating us isn't ever going to know really what we are because they're only going to see a collective piece. They can look at our Form 990 and have a pretty good idea what we have on the collective side. They're not going to see the ink side, and that's a the corporate piece is a pretty darn big piece, right? So, and there are other programs that have the same thing as well. And so I guess what I'm saying is that that my answer is an opinion. It's not necessarily a fact. If that does that help
Sure.
kind of like you provide a caveat.
Yeah.
So I think in women's, if specifically with women's basketball, I think we're near the top of the Big Ten. I think we are, Lucy Olson was the biggest portal player in the offseason. Okay. And I think there were only 3 or 4 programs that could have afforded her and were in the mix for her, and we were one of those. So one of those handful. So I think we are in the pantheon of NIL for women's sports, women's basketball anyway. I think that we are not taking a back seat. At least we weren't last off season. Now, could things be happening around us for other, in collectives for women's? Yeah, could be. It also could be that there is other teams in the Big Ten with maybe more money that just want to know part of that.
Mm.
I don't know, but I think that just from the from that portal off season, I kind of got the impression that there were really we're in pretty tall cotton as a program from the standpoint of other kids looking at us and also from the ability to afford a pretty highly sought after player. So there's women's basketball. Men's basketball, I would say that this is again my guess. I think that we are in the bottom quartile of the Big Ten in men's basketball. I have not been as successful as I would like to be in
Mm.
raising money for men's basketball, and I'll take blame for that. I just haven't been good at it. And that falls on me. But uh, you know, that's just kind of where I think we are. I don't. I'd say last. We're not last.
Yeah.
But there are kids out there that are making considerable amounts of money for other schools, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he would be the most expensive player on our team and by far, and he's average. Like I'm just sitting there like looking at what some of these other kids make, talking to other collective people, like, hey, how much you paying so and so, and just to kind of get an idea. You do that just so you can kind of get an idea what the market is. And I'm like, you're paying that guy that much? Oh my God. But then they'll say, yeah, but we're also paying this guy this much. And you're going, oh, sheesh, your payroll is a little bit more than ours. Um, and then in football, I think I used to think we were towards the top quartile of the Big Ten with the additions of Oregon, USC, that group.
Mhm.
I think those guys are above us. Washington, I'm not sure about. Who else did we have? Those three. Didn't we have another one? Who am I missing? That came into the Big
UCLA.
Ten. Oh, UCLA. UCLA's NIL program was. I don't know. I shouldn't talk too much about that, but I don't know that. I think that I think Chip Kelly had made some comments whenever he left there that probably influenced my opinion with regards to their NIL program. So I'll leave it at that. Um, but it may be different now. I mean, that was a year ago. Anyway, um, so I would say that we're probably middle of the pack.
Okay.
I think we're a little north of the middle of the pack, but I don't. But I also, well, that doesn't sound great. Look who's in our conference. I mean, I think let's put it this way: of our rivals, the teams that our trophy games. I
Sure.
feel good about us. relative to those squads. Are we going to have an NIL program that's better than Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon? I mean, we don't have, unless somebody starts making something that competes with Nike shoes, I mean, it's going to be tough.
Don't hold your breath. Yeah.
Yeah, USC, that anybody that could pay Caleb Williams like what, $7 million or whatever they paid him. I don't know what it was. It may not even been true for all I know, but um, I just have to assume that they have considerable amounts of resources there. So that group, Penn State's, it's what's interesting. Penn State's NIL program, I mean, it disbanded. It was until about a year ago, like it got off to a horrible start. In fact, they just crashed and burned, and then someone picked it up, and it's blossomed. So I think we were way ahead of them for the longest time. And I think
Mm,
they have resources there.
sure.
So I think they've probably moved past us. But um the whole thing is going to get really interesting as we move along, and hopefully um, our budgets uh, rise with the tide and keep us competitive, because I think you, me, and everybody else probably listening to this wants the Hawks to win, and I think if you're listening to this, I think you've probably figured out that money is a factor in college athletic success at this point. And so, and NIL is going to be a piece of that.
Right. Right. Brad, we've reached about an hour. Are you okay with sticking around for a couple more questions?
Of course, I've got another client call at, actually it's not a client, it's a swarm call at 5:30, my 5:30 time. So
We
I
will.
got 20 minutes.
Perfect. We'll get you out of here by then. I want to be respectful of your time. Really appreciate it.
Nope, no problem.
But the the to revert back a little bit to talking about maybe the differences in sports, is it just maybe that, we're talking about the differences in these programs, right, across the Big Ten? Is it just differences in how large maybe a fan base is for a sport versus another that makes it easier to maybe get those donations toward a specific sport, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think you're onto it. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot of factors, right? It's do they want to, the people who want to financially support NIL, which sport do they want to support? Um, you
Because they can
know,
they can pick, right? When they
well, for us, yes. I mean, it didn't used to be that way. When I
right.
first started this, I didn't have the capability at that point. I mean, I was drinking through a fire hose,
Yeah.
trying to learn what I was doing, and I didn't give anybody, unless they were going to give me I don't know, $10,000 or more. I didn't let them pick where their money would go. Now you can give $5 to women's basketball, six to men's, and eight to rowing if you want. Whatever you want to do. Not a problem for me at this point. But when I started, it was 80, 10, 10. It was 80. If you gave me $100, 80 would go in the football bucket, 10 would go in the men's basketball bucket, 10 would go in the women's basketball bucket.
Hmm.
And so I might be somewhat to blame for how much money we have in each one because of the way I originally started. And so if someone just gives me a check to the collective, that's how I'm going to split it. If they don't say a particular sport, that's how the money's going to be split. Now, how did I get to 80, 10, 10? I basically said, well, I took the number of people on the football roster, I took the number of people on the men's basketball roster, I put the number of people on the women's basketball roster, and into a bucket. 10% of them are women's basketball, 10% are men's basketball, and 80% are football.
Right.
That, for better or for worse, that's how I did it. Okay. I'm an actuary. There's an equation. You may not like it, but there's math involved.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. But now, I mean, if someone, it really, I think at this point, the people who are writing bigger checks, at least for Iowa, tends to be more wanting to support football than men's basketball, for example. Not, that's not because I can trust me. It's not because I go out there and say, "Hey, give this to football, don't give it to men's basketball." There's none of that. I want them to give to whichever program they want to support. It's their choice.
Mhm.
Now, if they just give me a whole bunch of money and say, "Just use it however you want," then I'm going to go 80-10-10.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, no, that
that's
was
really
that was
my
perfect.
my my view.
No, but yeah, that makes sense. The other, well, we're talking about, moving money, moving money around and stuff like that.
Yeah,
We have
yeah, yeah.
Waterloo Chaz asked about how much, or how Swarm is doing in terms of the beer, the water sales, the rounding up from concessions. How much is that helping out?
Good question. So beer, um, so the Swarm beer got off to a terrific start, and then it kind of took a dip, and then they changed their recipe, and then it picked back up again. Swarm beer we probably get, I'm going to say around $100,000 a year
Okay.
from that, um, which we'll take it, right? We just started our Swarm Water relationship, and they're really, for anybody that's watching, I mean, I think if they're in Des Moines, I think they're at any Quick Trip. So if you're in Des Moines, go to a Quick Trip and get some Swarm Water. It's pretty good stuff, I think. Pretty high quality stuff. Um, and we get like 25% of the rake. So you're helping us out by getting Swarm Water. I think it's priced less than maybe a smart water or something like that. So I mean, it's one small way to help support us. But we haven't gotten much from that yet because it's still pretty much in its infancy. Now the rounding up, I believe that one's frustrated me because I feel like we should be making tons of money on that. But it's a great idea, and I appreciate that athletics is allowing us to do it. But I think I'm trying to remember. I want to say it's like 25 grand from football, something like that.
Ow,
Yeah,
that's
you would think it would
surprising
be a
to
lot
me.
more. You'd think
Yeah.
it'd be a lot more. No, it was what bothered me. This is me being selfish, okay? This is selfish Brad coming out. I'll get something and it'll be 2075 round up. Yeah, so Swarm gets a quarter, and then would you like to tip? And it's like 29, and then I'm giving $4
Hmm.
to the nothing wrong with the West Branch, whatever they are, that are doing this, and I they do need money. It would be nice though if I could direct some of my tip to the Swarm, but that may not be possible. But anyway, yeah, Swarm gets a quarter, and someone else gets $4. I wish that we had a little. I wish the tip would part of the tip would go to the Swarm or what have you. But anyway, I'm still appreciative, very appreciative. It's just you know, not as lucrative as I think it could be.
I really would have thought it would have been a lot more for football.
Yeah,
That's just really
yeah. Well, here's the other thing. The other thing is, so you got to understand how the mechanics of this work. Because I was like, we got to do a better job here. We got to, so what it is that let's say you've got a team, a local team, and I think they volunteer to go and do the concessions, and it could be a different group every single week. It's not like there are like, oh, I'm a Kinnick paid,
sure.
you know, person that serves beer and whatever else. It's not like, you know what I mean? It's like there's volunteers that man the booths. And so it's not like they have a lot of formal training, right? They're not gonna and you know, if you think about it, just to be fair, what are they going to be most are they going to be that interested in asking every single person, hey, do you want to round up for the Swarm to support Iowa student athletes?
Right.
But they're very interested in turning around the thing and saying, which would you like to tip? 18, 20, or 22% or whatever,
Right. Right.
because that benefits them, right?
Yep.
Um, and I'm not trying to be what's the word? I don't know. I'm not trying to rip on these, the people that are doing this. There's not I don't
Sure.
mean anything bad about them at all.
Sure.
It's just that the incentive there isn't there as much as I would like it for it to be to help us. And again, well, I'm appreciative of the opportunity, but I'm hopeful that next year more people are gonna be interested in that. I also, as an actuary, I would love to design the prices a little bit differently so that
Get it.
whatever people buy, it ends in like point oh 0.01, point
Yeah.
0.1.
Yeah. uh,
Yeah,
I,
let's not make it an even number. Let's just make it a point oh 0.01. Let's charge $4 and a penny for
yeah.
for things so that whatever they get, it ends up in like 8 cents. We're getting 92 cents every time someone rounds up as opposed to a quarter. We
Right.
could we could double things up real fast, triple things up if we are just a little bit more creative in our pricing here, guys.
Right. Um, the other thing, and this was from the very beginning of our conversation, to switch gears again a little bit here,
Yep.
is you mentioned agents being involved. Is there
It's the worst part of my job. Not even close.
is
It's the
there
worst
any
part.
right? Is there anything maybe you can share, like a story that sticks out to you?
I mean, I there's I can write a book on agent stories at this point.
I'd
Trying to
pay for
think what
that.
kind of story, yeah, you want to hear. I mean, we had a player that this is typical where agent calls me and says, "How much are you going to pay such and such player next year?" And we say, right, and then I hem haw and think about it and talk to coaches, figure out what they think of this player, blah blah blah, and I go back to them and say, "We're going to pay him X dollars." Really? Wow. Well, I've got so and so offering Y dollars, and Y is 2.5 times what we're going to pay him. Okay. So are you gonna? He's like, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Do you want him to leave or not?" Because he's ready to go if you're not going to come up from that, right? And this is commonplace, okay? And so you have to go back and say, what do we think? And then in this case that I'm thinking, in this specific case I'm thinking, we said we're holding steady. If he wants to go make 2.5 times, wish him the best and hope that things work out. Then the kid doesn't leave. Why didn't he leave? Because the agent is full of shit. That's why he didn't leave. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you're having to deal with. Um, and the other part that's really bad about the agents now is again, the NFL model's better. The NFL agents all have to be like certified. They're not a to
Right.
be an agent of a college kid means that the college kid just has to like you. He can make his roommate is an agent. I
Mhm.
mean, it's the AAU coach. It's the uncle. It's the whatever, and it's brutal to deal with. Some of them are professional and great. They're at least a reputable firm and all of that. But there for every one of those, you've got you got a whole bunch that are this is his agent, and it's like agent in quotes, right?
Mhm.
And you're having to deal with the sleight of hand, all the lying, all the shenanigans that that come about. So yeah, I mean, trying to think other interesting agent stories. I'm sure I'll think of a bunch of them after we hang up and go, "Oh, I wish I would have said
Yeah.
that," but
Sure.
yeah,
That's great. That's great. Um, well, Brad, I think the other point that you made earlier that I also would like to emphasize and that I think is taken for granted is stepping up when an SEC, school pops in, for example,
yeah, oh
ACC
yeah,
school. I think
oh
that's
yeah,
really important. I mean, for whoever you mentioned the defensive lineman is, um, that's that's an underrated part of your job that I think goes underappreciated as well.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, that people don't realize that um, a good part of our success is unnoticed because you expect such and such player to come back. You expect Jay Higgins to be back. You expect Xavier Nwankpa to be back. You expect all these players to come back. And a lot of them are really good players. And believe this or not, other teams have realized they're pretty good players. And so a lot of them will try to lure our players away, and it's my job to make sure that they're not financially being harmed, if you will. Harm's not the right word. Disadvantaged by sticking around here and playing for a program that they really, really want to play for, and a coach that they would literally jump in front of a bus for, and fans that they're going to dream about for the rest of their lives as being just how cool it was to play in front of. So, um, yeah, I mean retaining players. I mean how many really good players have left here that we wanted to keep?
I mean, football wise,
Yeah, give me football. Give me football players that have left here that we didn't really want to leave. I can think of one for sure. He's a left tackle at Alabama.
oh well, yeah, yeah, that one, yeah,
Um, but I mean, other than him,
right.
I mean, I feel like we've really kept our group together and I think that's a real feather in our cap. And again, what I want people to understand too is that um, this isn't a me thing. This isn't Swarm is really an accumulation the of the support that your readers, posters, and other Hawkeye fans are giving. It's if I didn't have any money or any financial backing from our fans, we would be garbage. Doesn't matter how good I am or not am at our job. Without resources, we have no chance. And the resources are provided by our network of fans, and you have a good following in your group. So just want to thank everybody who supports us. Hope that they'll continue to support us if they're supporting us. If they're not, maybe this hour and 25 minutes or however long it is has convinced them that, you know what, maybe being part of the Swarm would be pretty cool because you are investing in the success of Iowa athletics, and you get to pick whatever sport you want to invest in. Um, so I appreciate your time, Elliot.
Absolutely.
And, if we can do this again, I'd love to do it.
Hell yeah. Count me in, Brad. Let's do it. We appreciate you
Let,
too.
awesome. Well,
Yeah.
great. Well, I hope that you have a great weekend, and whoever's listening to this is off to a good start on Monday.
All righty. Well, we will wrap it up here. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of HawkCast. Appreciate Brad for hopping on. Before you get out of here, make sure you hit that subscribe button here on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're at. Drop a like, drop a comment. If you're not a premium subscriber yet, you can do that today. iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. Don't forget to leave that rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify as well. For now, I am Elliot Clough. He's Brad Heinrichs. We will see you next time.